The wind howled through the abandoned village, carrying echoes of a battle long past. Among the ruins, a young girl's voice pierced the silence. "Don't forget me." The soldier, worn by war and haunted by memories, froze. Every step back to the graveyard felt heavier than the last. Somewhere in the shadows, a loyal German shepherd waited, its eyes reflecting a truth the soldier could not ignore. This was no ordinary return, it was a journey through grief, loyalty, and a promise that refused to die. The first light of dawn broke over the remnants of the village. Broken rooftops and splintered walls caught the weak golden light, casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. Daniel, the soldier, tightened the strap on his worn backpack, his eyes scanning the ruins. Every step he took felt heavy, not just with the weight of his gear but with the memories that seemed to cling to the stones, the debris, and the empty streets. Shadow, his black German shepherd, walked beside him, tail low but alert, sniffing the cracked earth and abandoned buildings. He remembered the day he had left. Smoke and chaos had filled these streets, and in the confusion, she had vanished, a young girl with wide, terrified eyes and a voice that clung to him like a tether. "Don't forget me." At the time, he had promised himself, silently, that he would survive, return, and keep his promise. But years had passed, and with each day, the distance between memory and reality had grown. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, charred wood, and the lingering metallic tang of old blood. Every corner he turned seemed to echo with faint sounds, a distant laugh, the scraping of boots, the soft whisper of his name carried by the wind. Shadow's ears twitched at every noise, his body tense, ready to protect or alert at the slightest hint of danger. Daniel's eyes fell on the old church at the village center. Its steeple had collapsed during the siege, and the wooden doors hung askew on rusted hinges. He remembered that day, the fire, the screams, the girl clutching his hand as they fled. She had slipped past him, lost in the panic, leaving only the echo of her plea. And now, standing before the ruin of the church, he felt that echo again. "Don't forget me." He knelt by a pile of rubble, brushing aside debris, searching for a marker, a clue, anything that could lead him to her final resting place. Shadow lay low, nose to the ground, pawing at a small, broken piece of wood. It was a fragment of a box, charred but still intact, with letters faintly visible. Daniel's fingers traced the markings, a name, a date, a tiny, etched heart. The weight of realization hit him, the girl hadn't survived. Her grave was here, somewhere amidst these ruins. Time seemed to stretch as he followed the scattered remains, piecing together the fragments of the past. Each step brought a mix of grief and determination. He found a makeshift path between toppled walls, leading to a small, overgrown cemetery at the edge of the village. The iron gates were twisted, vines crawling over headstones, some broken or half-buried. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Shadow growled softly, sensing something beyond sight. Daniel moved forward, scanning the tombstones, until one caught his eye. It was simple, a small, unassuming stone, worn by years of neglect. Yet, it radiated a solemn presence that made his heart ache. He knelt, brushing aside leaves and dirt. The name engraved there matched the one from the charred box fragment, the girl who had whispered her plea so many years ago. Tears welled up in his eyes, unbidden, as the flood of memory and loss crashed over him. Shadow nuzzled his hand, grounding him in the moment, offering silent comfort. He sank to his knees fully, hands gripping the stone as he whispered her name, promising silently, "I haven't forgotten you. I'm here now." The wind stirred around them, lifting the tattered leaves and carrying away the echoes of the past. The soldier stayed there, silent except for the sound of his own breathing and Shadow's low, steady rumble. Hours passed as he cleaned the area, set small stones around the grave, and lit a candle he had carried in his pack. The flame flickered in the soft breeze, illuminating the names carved into the stone, the dates that marked a life too short, and the heart that had connected them across time. He spoke softly to her, recounting memories, regrets, promises, and even moments of courage he wished she had witnessed. As evening approached, the sky darkened with clouds, and the faint glow of the candle became more pronounced against the growing shadows. Daniel finally stood, exhaustion pressing on him, but a sense of closure softened the grief. Shadow remained by the grave, vigilant, eyes scanning the horizon as if guarding her memory. This was only the beginning of reckoning with the past. There were letters to read, mementos to return, secrets to uncover, and a journey to fully honor the bond that had survived war, separation, and death. But for now, he had found her grave, answered her plea, and reaffirmed his promise. He had not forgotten. The night had descended fully over the village. The moon, pale and distant, cast ghostly silver light over the crumbling walls and the twisted metal of destroyed homes. Daniel remained at the grave a moment longer, letting the weight of memory settle. Shadow's presence beside him was a constant, a reminder that he was not alone in his grief, that someone, something, was still watching over him and the memory of the girl. As he rose, he noticed faint footprints in the dirt around the cemetery. Some were old, others newer. His heart quickened. Could there be someone else returning? Or was it the wind playing tricks, stirring fallen leaves into the shapes of memories long gone? Shadow sniffed the ground intently, ears pricked, low growl vibrating in his chest. The dog's instincts had never failed him, and Daniel knew to follow Shadow's cues carefully. Daniel stepped carefully over the uneven ground, keeping his eyes fixed on the horizon. He remembered the stories of survivors, villagers who had hidden in basements or attics during the chaos. Perhaps some had returned, perhaps some memories had been preserved in letters, or journals. The urge to uncover every detail, every trace of her life, pushed him forward. The soldier's mind wandered to that final encounter. He remembered holding her trembling hands, trying to shield her from the smoke and noise. She had looked up at him with trust, a gaze so pure it had haunted his dreams. "Don't forget me," she had whispered then, and now, standing in front of her grave, he realized the weight of that plea. He had survived countless battles, faced death countless times, but the war against forgetting, against losing the memory of the ones who mattered, was perhaps the hardest fight of all. As he walked back toward the edge of the cemetery, Daniel noticed a small, makeshift shrine someone had left. A candle burned faintly, the smoke curling into the night sky. Small flowers, fresh despite the cold, had been arranged carefully around the base of a ruined gravestone. His heart tightened. Whoever had come here before him had cared deeply, and it reinforced the soldier's sense that this place, this girl, was not forgotten entirely. Shadow suddenly barked sharply, and Daniel froze. The sound came from deeper in the village, where the ruins of homes leaned precariously into the darkness. A figure, shadowed and indistinct, moved between broken walls. Daniel's hand went instinctively to his backpack, to the strap where a small flashlight rested. He flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but collapsed beams and shattered bricks. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. Shadow growled again, low and steady, a sound that vibrated through the ground beneath them. Memories came rushing back in a flood, the girl's laughter as she ran through the village square, her small hands clutching his, the way she had looked at Shadow as if the dog were a guardian angel in fur. And then the chaos, the fire, the smoke, the screams, and finally, the separation. He remembered the helplessness, the guilt, the silent vow he had made amidst tears and gunfire, to return. And now he had, yet the journey was far from over. He reached the edge of what had once been the town hall. Its roof had collapsed, leaving only jagged beams jutting into the night sky. Inside, debris was scattered like memories, each broken piece telling a story of panic, survival, and loss. Daniel stepped cautiously, Shadow close, ears swiveling. The soldier's flashlight caught a glimmer of something half buried beneath rubble, a small wooden box, carved with symbols, partially charred. Kneeling, Daniel pulled it free. The box was fragile, but intact enough to reveal its contents, letters, a tiny doll, and a locket with her photograph. The sight of it sent a jolt through him. He opened the letters, reading fragments of her thoughts, fears, and dreams. She had been a child, but her words carried wisdom beyond her years. In her handwriting, she had documented her hopes, the people she had loved, and a deep longing for peace. Daniel's hands shook. Shadow rested his massive head against Daniel's leg, sensing the surge of emotion. The dog had been with him through firefights, bombings, and endless nights of solitude, yet even Shadow seemed moved by the silent weight of memory carried in those letters. The soldier realized that the girl's spirit, her essence, was not just in the grave, not just in the village ruins, but in these traces she had left behind. Hours passed as Daniel read through each letter, piecing together the story of her final days. The wind howled outside, rattling broken windows, carrying with it whispers of the past. Shadows danced on the walls, flickering in the light of his flashlight. Yet in that darkness, there was also understanding, closure beginning to form. He knew that his promise had not been in vain. He had returned. He had remembered. And now, in these final hours, he could honor her memory fully. As dawn approached, the soldier set the letters carefully back into the box, closing it gently. Shadow nudged him, as if urging him forward. There was more to do, more graves to visit, more memories to honor, more echoes of the past to face. Yet for the first time, Daniel felt a calm resolve settle within him. The journey would be long, but it was a journey he would not walk alone. Shadow would remain at his side, unwavering, and the girl's memory would guide him every step of the way. The first light of dawn painted the horizon with faint streaks of orange and pink, casting long shadows over the ruined village. Daniel lifted the box carefully, securing the fragile letters in the small locket inside his backpack. Shadow remained close, ears alert, nose twitching as if trying to sniff the memories lingering in the air. The village was silent now, but the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating, carrying the echoes of the chaos that had once consumed it. The soldier moved cautiously through the streets, stepping over fallen beams and shattered bricks. Each step seemed to awaken memories that clung stubbornly to the ruins, the laughter of children, the cries of the frightened, the frantic footsteps of people fleeing danger. Daniel's mind replayed those moments in fragments, each one sharper and more vivid than the last. The girl's small voice calling for help, the frantic scramble through smoke-filled alleys, Shadow's bark cutting through the chaos, it all played like a film in his mind, unrelenting and vivid. They reached what remained of the town square. A broken fountain sat in the center, cracked and dry, water long gone. The names etched into its base were worn and faded, barely legible, but some still remained, whispering stories of the people who had once lived there. Daniel knelt for a moment, tracing the names with his fingers, letting each one sink in. Shadow circled him, alert, occasionally pausing to sniff at the ground or raise a low warning growl. Daniel's thoughts turned again to the girl. He had carried her memory in his heart for years, replaying her last words, her frightened eyes, the way she had clung to him as the world fell apart around them. "Don't forget me," she had whispered, and he had never forgotten. Now, with the letters in the locket, he could finally understand her life in more depth, the hopes she had nurtured, the fears she had endured, and the courage she had shown in the face of overwhelming danger. As they moved deeper into the square, a sudden movement caught Daniel's eye. A small figure darted across the rubble, moving too quickly and silently for a human child. His heart leapt into his throat. Shadow stiffened beside him, ears pricked, growl low and menacing. The soldier raised his flashlight again, scanning the ruins. There, between two fallen walls, he saw it, a small, tattered doll, half buried in debris, its painted eyes staring up at him. He crouched, picking it up carefully. The doll was familiar, he had seen it clutched in the girl's hands on that fateful day. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. The village was supposed to be empty, yet here were traces of her presence, reminders that the past was not entirely gone. He felt a mix of sorrow and hope, sorrow for the loss, hope that some part of her essence still lingered, guiding him, reminding him of his promise. Shadow nudged him gently, pressing his cold nose against Daniel's hand as if sensing the surge of emotion. The bond between them was unspoken but profound. This dog had been with him through everything, an anchor in the chaos of memory and grief. The soldier continued through the ruins, each step deliberate. He came across an old school building, its roof partially collapsed, walls scorched and crumbling. The smell of smoke and charred wood hung heavy in the air. He paused at the doorway, peering inside. Desks were overturned, papers scattered, blackened remnants of books lay strewn across the floor. A faint sound of fluttering caught his attention. He moved closer, stepping over debris carefully. In the corner, caught beneath a beam, was another notebook. He reached for it, careful not to disturb the fragile structure. The notebook was hers, filled with sketches, writings, and fragments of stories she had dreamed up. Daniel sat on a fallen beam, Shadow resting his head on the soldier's lap. He read through the pages, each word a window into her world. Her dreams, fears, and joys were captured in a way that was raw and unfiltered, a glimpse of her soul. The soldier realized that her voice, though silenced in life, was still speaking to him now through these artifacts. He felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. He had to honor her memory, to preserve it, to ensure that the story of her life, brief and tumultuous as it had been, would not be lost to time. Hours passed unnoticed as Daniel sifted through the remnants of the school, piecing together fragments of her existence. Shadow remained vigilant, ears swiveling, body tense at every unexplained sound. The village, though seemingly abandoned, seemed alive with whispers of the past, murmuring memories of lives that had once been full and vibrant. The soldier felt the enormity of it, the enormity of loss, of survival, and of the fragile threads that connect the living to those who are gone. By mid-afternoon, the sun had climbed high, casting harsh shadows over the ruins. Daniel stood, carefully packing the notebook and doll alongside the letters and locket. He looked down the empty street, the village stretching out in desolate silence, yet filled with the echoes of the past. He knew he couldn't stay forever. There was a larger world outside these ruins, obligations to the living, missions to continue. But he also knew he would return. He would return for the girl, for the memories, for the fragments of life that deserved to be remembered. As he and Shadow made their way toward the village outskirts, a sudden rustling from behind a fallen wall made him freeze. His hand went to his side, fingers brushing the familiar grip of his weapon. Shadow growled, low and menacing, hackles raised. For a moment, the soldier held his breath. Then, a small cat, thin and cautious, emerged from the shadows. It paused, staring at them with wary eyes before disappearing into the debris. Daniel exhaled slowly, a mix of tension and relief washing over him. Even in the aftermath of chaos, life persisted, fragile but unyielding. Daniel finally reached the boundary of the village, the ruins stretching out behind him like a frozen memory. He paused, looking back one last time. The letters, the doll, the notebook, and the locket were heavy in his pack, but they were more than objects. They were bridges to a past that demanded respect, acknowledgement, and remembrance. Shadow leaned against him, silent but supportive, a companion in grief and memory. The soldier felt a profound sense of purpose settle over him. He had returned to the past, faced its echoes, and emerged with a renewed commitment to honor the girl's memory in every action he would take from this moment onward. The afternoon sun had climbed high, yet it brought little warmth to the desolate village streets. Shadows stretched long and twisted across the ruins, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of smoke. Daniel walked slowly, each step deliberate, carrying the precious cargo of memories, the letters, the locket, the notebook, and the doll that had once been clutched in the girl's tiny hands. Shadow's paws crunched softly over the rubble, ears swiveling, always alert, the silent sentinel he had become. Daniel's mind replayed the events of that fateful day. He remembered the first time he had heard her cry out, "Don't forget me," and the raw panic in her eyes as she clung to him. The memory hit him again, sharp and relentless, making his chest tighten. Shadow nudged him, sensing the tension, pressing against his side with comforting warmth. The soldier exhaled slowly, reminding himself that they were here now, alive, and with the chance to honor her memory properly. The village square, now partially cleared of debris, offered a grim reminder of the chaos that had consumed it. A few scattered benches, blackened and splintered, remained upright, though warped and charred. The fountain, once a centerpiece, lay in ruins, cracks spiderwebbed across its stone surface, inscriptions worn away by time and fire. Daniel knelt beside it, brushing away the dust from a small engraved name that had somehow survived. He traced it with his finger, feeling a connection that transcended years. Shadow growled softly, low in his throat, as movement flickered near the edge of the square. Daniel's hand instinctively went to his side, fingers brushing the familiar grip of his sidearm. He turned slowly, scanning the ruined alleyways. Nothing. Only the rustling of the wind through broken roofs and shattered walls. Shadow's ears twitched, and his gaze followed Daniel's, alert but calm. The bond between soldier and dog was unspoken yet complete. They knew when danger lingered and when the past itself was simply echoing through empty streets. Daniel approached the old school once more, its skeleton of a building leaning precariously. Windows were smashed, doors missing, and charred desks lay scattered across the floor. Yet among the destruction, signs of life persisted, scraps of paper fluttering in the breeze, a pencil rolling across the floor, a child's drawing pinned clumsily to a blackened wall. Daniel's heart ached at the evidence of innocence interrupted, a story left unfinished. He picked up the drawing carefully. Crude stick figures in bright colors, a sun smiling down on what had once been a playground. A tear threatened to spill, but he blinked it back, focusing on the task at hand. He moved carefully through the building, notebook in hand, shadow close at heel. Each page of sketches and writings seemed to whisper secrets of the girl's imagination, stories she had dreamed, fears she had faced, joys she had known in moments of fleeting peace. Daniel read silently, absorbing the emotions, feeling the depth of a life lived too briefly. Shadow rested his head against Daniel's knee, the soldier's fingers stroking the dog's fur, grounding him in the present even as memories tugged him backward. A sudden creak from the floor above made Daniel freeze. Shadow's ears perked, and his body stiffened. The air seemed to thicken, charged with tension. Daniel lifted his flashlight, the beam slicing through darkness, revealing the collapsed stairwell and splintered beams overhead. Nothing moved, but the weight of the moment was palpable. The building felt alive, haunted by echoes of the past, by memories of children's laughter now silenced. Daniel's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to breathe, to remain steady. Shadow sensed his resolve and relaxed slightly, though still vigilant. He discovered a small hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, partially covered by rubble. Carefully, Daniel pried it open. Inside were letters, brittle with age, tied together with a frayed ribbon. The handwriting was small, precise, and elegant, a story of hope and survival, of ordinary moments cherished amidst extraordinary danger. Daniel felt a lump in his throat as he read. The letters spoke of the girl's family, of her dreams, of a life interrupted too soon. He realized that each artifact, each remnant, was a lifeline, connecting him to a past that demanded remembrance. Shadow growled again, this time more insistently, and Daniel's attention snapped toward the doorway. The wind had shifted, carrying a faint, unfamiliar sound, a soft sobbing, almost imperceptible, yet human. Daniel froze, scanning every shadow. His hand went to the radio, calling in to check for any reports of survivors, but the channels were silent. He stepped forward cautiously, Shadow at his side, ears twitching, muscles coiled like springs. The sound grew clearer, echoing through the ruined halls. A small voice, soft, frightened, "Please, help me." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Could it be possible? After all these years, someone had survived, hidden, waiting for help. He followed the sound, moving carefully, stepping over debris, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Shadow moved like an extension of his own senses, alert to every movement, every whisper of danger. Finally, in a corner obscured by fallen beams, Daniel saw her. A girl, small and trembling, her eyes wide with fear, clothes torn and dirty, but unmistakably alive. Daniel's heart surged, relief and determination colliding in a rush of emotion. Shadow barked softly, tail wagging, approaching her with careful friendliness. The girl froze at first, fear etched into every line of her face, but then she saw Daniel, recognized him as a figure of trust from the past. She whispered, barely audible, "Don't forget me." Daniel knelt beside her, keeping his voice low and steady. "I could never forget you," he said gently, extending a hand. Shadow nuzzled her cautiously, allowing her to touch his fur, offering comfort without judgment. The soldier felt the gravity of the moment, the promise of the past fulfilled, the memory preserved, the life once thought lost now real and tangible. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close, feeling the weight of responsibility and relief, knowing that their journey was far from over, yet a critical step had been taken. The girl clung to Daniel's arm, trembling, as the wind whistled through the shattered walls of the ruined school. Her tiny hands gripped his jacket with a desperation that spoke of days, perhaps weeks, alone and terrified. Shadow stood nearby, his head low, ears alert, eyes scanning every corner for threats. The soldier's heart ached for her, the weight of what she had endured pressing down like a stone. Daniel adjusted the girl in his arms, speaking softly. "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." The words felt insufficient, powerless against the magnitude of what she had survived, but he knew they had to be said. The girl nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, her face pressed against his chest. Shadow rested his massive paw on Daniel's foot, a silent acknowledgement that the moment was delicate, sacred. The ruined schoolyard outside was eerily quiet. Broken benches, twisted metal, and shattered playground equipment littered the ground. Once a place of laughter and play, it now bore the scars of chaos and destruction. Daniel led the girl carefully across the debris-strewn courtyard, his eyes constantly scanning for any signs of danger. Shadow's movements were precise, alert, every step measured, guarding the soldier and child with unwavering loyalty. As they reached the edge of the village, Daniel spotted a partially collapsed wall that led to the old supply building. Inside, it was dark, but the structure offered shelter. He helped the girl inside, guiding her to a relatively intact corner. Shadow lay down protectively, his head raised, eyes following every shadow. Daniel finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, the adrenaline ebbing slightly, replaced by exhaustion and relief. The girl's voice was a fragile whisper. I thought no one would find me." Daniel knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her tear-streaked face. "I promised I'd come back. I would never forget you." Shadow sniffed gently, nudging her hand with his nose, offering comfort in the way only a loyal dog could. Hours passed as Daniel tried to piece together what had happened. The girl spoke slowly, her voice trembling, recounting the days she had been trapped, hiding from dangers unseen, surviving on scraps of food she had found. The soldier listened intently, noting every detail, every fear, every moment of courage she had exhibited. Shadow occasionally barked softly at noises from outside, ensuring no one approached unnoticed. The storm had passed, leaving a strange, heavy silence in its wake. Rain puddles reflected fragments of broken buildings, and the air smelled of wet earth and smoke. Daniel decided they could not stay in the supply building, it was not secure. He needed to find a safe location, somewhere he could protect her until help arrived. He gathered what few supplies remained, rationing water and food for both the girl and Shadow. As they moved through the village, Daniel noticed signs of other survivors. Footprints in the mud, makeshift shelters, and scattered belongings hinted that some had managed to escape or find refuge. Yet, for every sign of life, there were reminders of loss, collapsed houses, charred furniture, personal items abandoned in haste. The contrast was stark, and Daniel's resolve hardened. He would not allow this girl to become another forgotten casualty. Night fell, and darkness enveloped the village. Daniel found a partially intact house with a roof that had survived the storm. Inside, they lit a small fire, careful to keep the smoke minimal to avoid drawing attention. The warmth brought a temporary comfort, but the soldier knew that danger still lurked beyond the walls. Shadow lay at the girl's feet, his body a protective barrier, eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fire. The girl curled up beside Shadow, finding solace in his presence. Daniel watched, a mixture of relief and worry tightening his chest. He knew that sleep was necessary, but he also knew that threats could emerge at any moment. He checked the surroundings repeatedly, ensuring no signs of intrusion. Every creak, every whisper of wind, made him tense, his senses alert. In the quiet moments, Daniel reflected on the promises he had made. "Don't forget me," she had said, and he realized that the weight of that plea went beyond mere words. It was a plea for memory, for recognition, for the assurance that someone would care enough to return. He had returned. Now, it was time to ensure that she could continue, that her story would not end here. The night stretched on, punctuated by distant sounds, animals stirring, water dripping, and the occasional creak of unstable structures. Daniel stayed awake, monitoring, planning, and comforting. Shadow's presence was a constant reassurance, the rhythmic sound of his breathing and the occasional shift of his body against the girl providing a fragile sense of security. By morning, a plan had formed in Daniel's mind. They needed to move to a more secure location, one that offered protection and access to aid. He packed the remaining supplies, ensuring the girl had what she needed, and readied himself to navigate the ruined village with Shadow leading the way. The sun rose slowly, casting a pale light over the devastation, illuminating the path they would take. As they stepped outside, the girl's small hand found his, clutching tightly. Daniel looked down at her, her eyes wide with trust and hope. Shadow walked ahead, ears forward, tail low but steady, ready to face any challenge. Together, the soldier, the girl, and the loyal dog moved through the ruins, a trio bound by trust, courage, and the promise that no one would be left behind. The path ahead was treacherous. The storm had left the village fragmented, with roads washed away, fallen trees blocking alleyways, and unstable structures threatening to collapse at the slightest disturbance. Daniel moved cautiously, guiding the girl through narrow gaps between debris. Every step was deliberate, every sound was noted. Shadow's sharp instincts were their first warning system. The dog paused frequently, sniffing the air, ears twitching, eyes scanning the horizon for danger. "Do you see anything?" the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. She clung to Daniel's hand, tiny fingers digging into his palm with a grip fueled by fear and trust. Daniel shook his head, scanning the remnants of what was once a bustling street. "Not yet." "Stay close," he replied softly. His voice carried a calm he didn't fully feel, but he knew the girl needed reassurance more than he needed honesty about his own fear. They navigated a narrow alley when a sudden sound made Shadow growl low in his throat. Daniel froze. Ahead, a flicker of movement caught his eye, shadows dancing across the crumbling walls. Someone, or something, was there. The girl's breath hitched, and she tightened her grip. Daniel crouched slightly, lowering his center of gravity, ready for whatever might emerge. Shadow stepped forward, his presence imposing, his growl now a warning resonating through the alley. A figure emerged, a young boy, no older than the girl, muddy and disheveled, carrying a torn backpack. He froze when he saw Daniel and Shadow, eyes wide with both fear and relief. I'm lost," he stammered. Daniel lowered his hand slowly, ensuring Shadow remained calm. "It's okay. You're safe now," he said. "We're just trying to get to a secure place." The boy nodded, hesitating, then cautiously stepped forward, Shadow sniffing him briefly before settling again. With the boy added to their small group, Daniel felt a renewed sense of responsibility. 2 children and a dog relied entirely on him. Every decision mattered. He scanned the map in his mind, the ruins, the collapsed bridges, and the flooded streets. They needed to reach the old community center. It was structurally sound and had enough space to shelter them until aid arrived. But the route was risky. Part of it would require crossing a narrow bridge over a swollen river, its waters dark and violent from the storm. As they approached the bridge, Daniel assessed the structure. The wooden planks were slick with rain, and several were partially submerged or missing. The river roared beneath, carrying debris and small logs that collided with the supports. Daniel knelt beside the girl, speaking gently. "We're going to cross carefully. Hold my hand tight, and don't let go of Shadow's leash." She nodded, her face pale but determined. Shadow sat, tail low, but eyes locked on the river, muscles tense. One by one, they began crossing. Daniel led, the girl in his arms, Shadow immediately behind, and the boy following, hands gripping the side ropes. The first few steps were stable, but a sudden plank snapped underfoot, causing the boy to stumble. Shadow barked sharply, leaning forward, ready to pull him to safety. Daniel grabbed the boy's arm just in time, steadying him as he regained balance. The girl whimpered, clutching Daniel tighter, but remained calm. They continued, every step a test of nerve, every plank a potential trap. Halfway across, a sudden gust of wind swept through, causing the ropes to sway violently. The girl's grip tightened, and Daniel's heart raced. Shadow growled, low and commanding, as if issuing a warning to the wind itself. "Almost there, just a few more steps," Daniel muttered, sweat and rain mixing on his brow. Finally, they reached the other side, hearts pounding, legs trembling from both adrenaline and fear. The community center stood ahead, partially damaged but intact. Windows were broken, and the doors hung slightly off their hinges, but it was shelter nonetheless. Daniel pushed the doors open, and the group stepped inside, cautiously. Shadow's ears twitched at every sound, the wind outside, the groaning of the structure, the distant cries of those still stranded. Daniel set the girl down first, then the boy, checking for injuries. Both were shaken but unharmed. He allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. Inside, the center was dim but functional. Tables were overturned, chairs broken, but the space was usable. Daniel moved quickly, barricading the most unstable sections and clearing a safe corner for the children. Shadow lay nearby, ever vigilant, nose to the floor, ready to detect any threat. The storm outside had passed, but its aftermath was a persistent danger. Mudslides, weakened structures, and unpredictable rivers could cause chaos at any moment. The children huddled together, finding comfort in Shadow's presence. Daniel checked the supplies they had brought, ration packs, water, a few blankets. It was enough to hold them for a short time, but longer-term solutions were needed. He pulled out a radio, static filling the silence before a weak voice came through, confirming that rescue teams were en route but delayed due to blocked roads. Daniel nodded grimly. "We have time, but we need to stay alert," he told the children. As night fell again, Daniel set up a perimeter using overturned furniture and whatever materials he could find. Shadow patrolled in circles, ears forward, tail low but steady. The children tried to rest, but the trauma of the storm and the escape kept their eyes wide open. Daniel stayed awake as well, listening to the creaks and groans of the building, preparing for any unexpected visitors. Every shadow could be a threat, every sound a warning. Hours passed. The storm's remnants continued to howl outside, rattling the walls and shaking loose debris. Daniel noticed small movements in the corner, rats, perhaps, or just the settling of the building. Shadow growled and then relaxed, signaling the immediate danger had passed. Daniel allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He moved to sit beside the girl, brushing damp hair from her face. "You're safe now," he whispered. "And I won't let anything happen to you." The girl looked up at him, eyes wide but calm for the first time in days. promise?" she asked. Daniel nodded firmly. Shadow nudged her hand with his nose, offering comfort. Together, they stayed huddled in the dim light of the shelter, waiting for dawn, for help, for the next chapter of their survival. The bond between soldier, children, and dog had strengthened, forged in the trials of the storm, the river, and the treacherous crossing. They were no longer just survivors, they were a team, bound by trust, courage, and the unwavering will to protect one another. Dawn arrived slowly, pale light spilling through the broken windows of the community center. Outside, the aftermath of the storm was stark. Trees had been uprooted, streets were muddy rivers, and the distant hum of water rushing over destroyed roads created a haunting soundtrack to the ruined town. Daniel stepped outside briefly, assessing the perimeter. Shadow moved close to his side, ears erect, alert to every crack of splintering wood and shifting debris. The soldier knew that danger wasn't gone. Nature had been cruel, but human unpredictability could be even worse. Inside, the children stirred. The girl, still clutching her small blanket, sat next to Shadow, who lay protectively over her legs. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, yet a flicker of trust and relief shone through. The boy was awake too, scanning the room with wide eyes. Daniel knew that their ordeal was far from over. The storm had passed, but shelter alone wasn't enough. They needed food, water, and a plan to escape the chaos surrounding them. He unpacked the remaining supplies, rationing them carefully. Each pack of water and food was precious, one misstep could leave them vulnerable. "We need to keep our strength," he told them gently. Shadow growled softly, alerting Daniel to the slightest movement from the room's darker corners. It was an unspoken rule between soldier and K9, protect the children at all costs, no matter the odds. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside. Daniel's heart jumped. Shadow leapt to his feet, fur bristling, tail stiff. The girl clung to him instinctively. "It's okay," he murmured, but his voice was tight. He grabbed his flashlight and cautiously stepped outside. The storm had left the town unrecognizable. Every street was an obstacle course of fallen trees, mud, and shattered debris. And yet, amidst this chaos, a shadow moved near the edge of the street, a figure, hunched, struggling against the wind and mud. Daniel signaled to Shadow. The dog growled, low and menacing, before moving forward. As they approached, the figure became clearer. It was an elderly man, soaked, shivering, and carrying what looked like a tattered bag. Daniel knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" he asked. The man's lips trembled, and he shook his head. "No. I lost everything, my home, my family. I can't. His voice broke. Daniel's chest tightened, but there was no time for pity. There were too many people depending on him now. "You'll be safe here," he said firmly. "Follow me, quickly." Back inside, the elderly man joined the small group, leaning against the wall, exhausted. Shadow sniffed him briefly, then settled again, sensing no immediate threat. The children's eyes widened, realizing their small shelter had just grown to include another survivor. Daniel felt a heavy responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Each person he brought into the group increased the risk, yet abandoning anyone wasn't an option. His mission was clear: protect and guide these people until safety was certain. Hours passed. Daniel scouted the perimeter intermittently, mapping safe routes and noting areas where debris could collapse. Shadow accompanied him each time, alert and unyielding. He watched the river's current, noting places where it could surge and flood lower areas. Supplies were dwindling, and communication with the outside world remained intermittent. The radio crackled occasionally, faint voices confirming that rescue teams were navigating blocked roads, but they were hours away at best. Daniel had to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Night fell again. The children huddled near Shadow, seeking comfort in his steady presence. The elderly man sat beside Daniel, speaking in low, trembling tones about the storm, his home, and the loved ones he had lost. Each story was a reminder of the destruction left in nature's wake, but also a testament to human resilience. Daniel listened quietly, plotting their next move. Shelter alone wasn't enough. They had to find a path to the main road once the waters receded slightly, or they would remain trapped indefinitely. Suddenly, a faint cry echoed from the corner of the building. Daniel froze. Shadow's ears twitched, nose to the ground, growl low in warning. The girl clung to him, and the boy instinctively moved closer. Daniel followed the sound, flashlight cutting through the shadows. Behind a pile of debris, a small puppy, soaked and shivering, whimpered. Its eyes were wide, pleading. Shadow immediately approached, sniffing and nudging the creature gently. Daniel smiled faintly, realizing that even amidst devastation, hope persisted in the smallest forms. He wrapped the puppy in a blanket, adding it to their growing group. With the night deepening, Daniel made rounds, checking barricades, reinforcing weak points, and ensuring that the children and elderly man remained safe. Shadow patrolled silently, a sentinel in the darkness. Daniel realized that survival wasn't just about avoiding immediate danger, it was about creating trust, maintaining morale, and staying vigilant against both natural and human threats. Each hour was a test of endurance, each sound a potential signal of danger. Hours later, fatigue finally began to claim him. He sat beside the girl and boy, Shadow resting at his feet. "We're going to make it," he whispered. "No matter what comes next, we'll face it together." The girl leaned against him, eyes slowly closing. The boy followed suit, exhaustion overtaking fear. Shadow rested his head on Daniel's knee, watching over them. For a brief moment, in the dim light and the stillness of the ruined building, Daniel allowed himself to believe that they could survive this nightmare. But deep down, he knew the storm had only revealed the beginning of their trials. Rivers could rise again, structures could collapse, and human desperation could turn anyone into an unforeseen threat. Yet one truth remained unshakable: as long as Shadow remained at his side, and as long as he held to his duty, no force, natural or human, would break their bond or their resolve. The night outside was a symphony of wind and water, branches scraping against walls, the distant roar of rivers that seemed intent on swallowing everything in their path. Inside the community center, Daniel tried to sleep in short bursts, alertness clinging to him like a second skin. Shadow never left his side, ears twitching at every subtle creak or distant splash. The girl stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, clutching Shadow's fur as if it were the only anchor in a world gone mad. Suddenly, a violent crash echoed through the building. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a wooden beam shifted dangerously. Daniel sprang to his feet, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. "Everyone stay put," he shouted, voice low but firm. Shadow growled, hackles raised, tail stiff as a board. The boy and girl froze in fear, and even the elderly man's trembling form straightened in response to the threat. Daniel moved toward the source of the noise. A section of the wall, weakened by water and wind, had collapsed, leaving a gaping hole through which the storm's fury seemed to press forward. Rainwater seeped through the cracks, flooding the floor in slow but relentless waves. The howling wind carried an almost tangible menace, a reminder that survival was not guaranteed, even within walls that felt safe mere hours ago. Shadow barked sharply, alerting Daniel to movement beyond the wall. Squinting through the hole, Daniel caught sight of a figure, barely visible, stumbling across the mud-soaked courtyard. Its features were obscured by darkness and driving rain, but the posture was human, the presence unmistakable. "Who's there?" Daniel called, voice firm, though his mind raced. There was no immediate response. The figure froze, then disappeared behind a fallen tree. Daniel's instincts screamed that this was no ordinary survivor. Shadow's growl deepened, warning him that this intruder was a threat. He grabbed his radio, attempting to reach any rescue teams nearby, but the signal was weak, the static overwhelming. He realized they were on their own, for now. Returning inside, Daniel reinforced the wall with debris and furniture, doing his best to prevent further intrusion. The children were huddled together, eyes wide with fear, the elderly man clinging to Daniel's arm. "We'll be okay," Daniel whispered, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Shadow and I will protect you." The dog nuzzled the girl, letting out a low, reassuring growl, a silent vow that no harm would come to them under his watch. Hours dragged on. The storm showed no mercy, lashing at the building with a relentless fury. Daniel monitored every sound, every shadow, aware that one mistake could turn their fragile sanctuary into a death trap. Outside, the water levels rose steadily, threatening to breach the lower windows. Daniel worked tirelessly, shifting sandbags, moving debris, ensuring that the flow would be redirected away from their shelter. Then came the sound that made his blood run cold, a faint, desperate cry, muffled by the roar of the storm, coming from beneath the floorboards. Daniel froze, flashlight scanning the room. Shadow's ears perked, his body tense, nose to the ground. The sound came again, more insistent, a voice laced with fear and exhaustion. "Please, help me." Without hesitation, Daniel pried open a loose floorboard, revealing a narrow crawlspace beneath the building. A small, trembling child, soaked and shivering, looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. I couldn't get out. I was trapped," the child stammered. Daniel's chest tightened, but there was no room for hesitation. He extended his hand gently, coaxing the child into his arms. Shadow barked once, softly, as if approving the rescue, and settled protectively beside them as Daniel lifted the child from the mud and darkness. Inside, the children watched with wide eyes, their fear momentarily eclipsed by relief. The elderly man muttered a quiet prayer of thanks, tears streaming down his weathered face. Daniel handed the child a blanket, comforting him as best he could. Shadow's presence was calming, a constant reassurance that they were not alone in this chaos. But Daniel knew that the danger was far from over. The storm was only one of many threats. Human desperation, the ever-present risk of injury, and the instability of the structure kept him on edge. He realized that to survive, they would need to move to higher ground once the rain eased, to find a location that offered both safety and access to rescue teams. He organized the group, ensuring that each person was accounted for and equipped for the journey ahead. Supplies were checked, blankets distributed, and instructions given in low, urgent tones. Shadow remained vigilant, his nose to the wind, eyes scanning every shadow and movement. Daniel's mind raced, calculating routes, potential obstacles, and the best time to move. Every decision carried weight, every second mattered. As the night deepened, a temporary calm settled over the area. The storm seemed to pause, as if catching its breath before another surge. Daniel allowed himself a moment to sit, exhausted, and watch the children sleep safely beside Shadow. The puppy, now dried and nestled against the girl, added a small comfort amidst the destruction. The elderly man sat quietly, nodding off in relief. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed almost normal. Yet Daniel's instincts told him otherwise. He knew this lull was temporary. The river would rise again, structures could collapse, and the unknown figure outside could return. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and checked the barricades once more. Shadow's eyes met his, reflecting the same determination, the same readiness to face whatever came next. The night was long, and every shadow seemed to whisper threats. But Daniel held firm, a sentinel in the storm, guided by duty, courage, and the unbreakable bond with Shadow. Survival was not guaranteed, but hope remained, a fragile, flickering flame in the darkness, protected by the soldier and his loyal canine. The first hints of dawn struggled through the thick clouds, gray and heavy with the promise of more rain. Inside the battered community center, Daniel was already on his feet, exhaustion pressing at his body like a weight he couldn't shake. Shadow prowled at his side, ears flicking to every sound, the distant rush of water, the occasional crash of falling debris, the faint murmur of voices far beyond their shelter. The rescued children huddled together, wrapped in blankets and shivering, but no longer crying. Relief had softened their fear, though the ordeal had left visible marks on their young faces. Daniel's eyes scanned each of them, his heart tightening at the thought of what could have happened if the storm had come sooner, if Shadow hadn't been there to alert him, if the collapsed floorboards had concealed them longer. He swallowed hard, knowing he couldn't dwell on that. There was work to be done. Outside, the river had swollen far beyond its banks, a churning, merciless torrent that claimed everything in its path. The streets were gone, replaced by sheets of water that surged over fences, vehicles, and debris. Daniel could see broken trees floating past, their roots upturned like the world had been turned inside out. The storm's fury had not relented. Daniel began organizing the small group, explaining the plan in quiet, deliberate tones. They would move to higher ground, to a warehouse on a hill he had scouted months earlier, a location that had withstood past floods and had access to emergency supplies. It was risky. The streets were impassable, the river unpredictable, and the storm's aftermath unstable. But staying put was no longer an option. Shadow's growl cut through the morning's relative calm. Daniel followed the dog's gaze to the broken doorway, where a shadowed figure emerged briefly from the rain, then disappeared behind a toppled fence. Daniel's pulse quickened. He didn't know if it was another trapped survivor or someone with intentions far more dangerous. He whispered instructions to the group, keeping his voice calm but urgent, and urged everyone to stick close. Shadow remained a silent sentinel, nose to the wind, eyes sharp. As they stepped outside, the full horror of the flood struck them. The streets were rivers, debris floated around like islands, and currents tugged at every loose object. Daniel assessed the path carefully, leading them along the safest route, balancing speed with caution. One misstep could mean being swept away. The children clung to each other and to him, trusting his judgment without question. Shadow moved alongside, sometimes darting ahead to check for hazards, barking warning when necessary. Halfway to the higher ground, disaster struck. A section of the riverbank collapsed under the weight of waterlogged soil. Daniel barely caught a teenager by the arm as the earth crumbled, sending debris and mud tumbling into the raging current. He stumbled backward, muscles straining, heart hammering. Shadow barked frantically, tail stiff, sensing the threat but unable to halt the natural force at play. Daniel's mind raced. Every second counted, every decision critical. The group pressed on, adrenaline surging through their veins. Rain continued to pour, soaking them to the skin, chilling them to the bone. The girl, gripping Shadow's collar, looked up at Daniel with wide, terrified eyes. "Will we make it?" she whispered, voice trembling. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing calm into his tone. "Yes," he said firmly. "We stick together, we keep moving, and we watch out for each other. We make it, I promise." They reached a collapsed bridge, a remnant of the storm's earlier wrath. The only way across was a narrow plank, slick with rain, stretched over the torrent below. Daniel went first, testing each step carefully. Shadow followed, paws sure despite the treacherous surface. The children hesitated, fear threatening to freeze them in place. Daniel's hand shot out, gripping each child, guiding them across, while the elderly man shuffled behind, trembling but determined. Halfway across, a violent gust of wind nearly knocked them off balance. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the river tugging at the plank, the current below roaring like a beast ready to devour them. Shadow lunged forward, bracing himself, growling low but steady. With careful, deliberate movements, Daniel shepherded everyone across, one by one, refusing to allow panic to take hold. Once on solid ground, they pressed on toward the warehouse. The path was treacherous but manageable, with mud and fallen branches threatening every step. Daniel's mind raced, calculating risks, scanning for further hazards, while Shadow remained vigilant, ears flicking, tail stiff, ready to react to anything. The children leaned on him, drawing strength from his calm determination. Finally, they reached the warehouse, a hulking structure perched on the hill, walls battered but standing strong. Daniel led them inside, securing the doors against the storm. Shadow immediately began patrolling the perimeter, nose to the ground, alert to any signs of danger. The children collapsed onto dry ground, shivering but alive. Daniel allowed himself a brief moment of relief, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. Inside, the warehouse offered safety for the first time in hours. Supplies awaited, blankets, food, water, and Daniel distributed them quickly, checking on each person. The girl hugged Shadow tightly, whispering words of gratitude that warmed Daniel's heart amidst the chaos. Even the elderly man, weary and drenched, smiled faintly, nodding in quiet acknowledgement of the soldiers' leadership. But Daniel knew the danger wasn't over. The storm had revealed vulnerabilities, and human desperation could manifest in unpredictable ways. The shadowy figure from earlier still haunted his thoughts, a reminder that they were not entirely safe, that survival required vigilance. Shadow lay nearby, ears twitching, watching, guarding the group with unwavering loyalty. Daniel allowed himself a small smile, rubbing the dog's head. "We made it this far," he whispered. "And we'll make it through whatever comes next." Shadow's tail thumped the floor in response, a silent agreement, a bond unbroken even in the face of nature's fury. Outside, the storm continued, a relentless reminder of the world's power. Inside, however, for the first time since the night began, there was a fragile peace, a momentary sanctuary, and the unspoken truth that together, they were stronger than the storm. The storm had finally begun to relent, though the clouds still hung low, heavy with the remnants of fury that had swept through the town. Inside the warehouse, the air was damp but filled with a strange sense of calm, the quiet after chaos. Daniel moved among the group, checking that the children were dry and warm, offering blankets and water. Shadow lay near the entrance, eyes scanning every shadow, ears twitching at every distant sound. Even now, the dog remained vigilant, unwilling to let his guard down, knowing that danger could still lurk in every corner. The girl who had clung to Daniel throughout the ordeal finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping Shadow's collar tightly. Her eyes were bright with tears, but there was also something else, a spark of hope, a recognition that someone had kept them safe when everything else had threatened to take them away. Daniel knelt down to her level, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You were brave," he said. "All of you were brave. That's what got us here." Outside, the river had calmed slightly, though the streets were still rivers of mud and debris. The storm had left behind a landscape transformed, roads and fences obliterated, trees uprooted, homes battered, and vehicles strewn like toys. Yet amidst the destruction, there were signs of survival, of human endurance. Daniel's gaze swept across the chaos, taking in the full magnitude of what had occurred, and silently vowing to help rebuild what had been lost. Shadow rose, stretching his massive frame, and padded over to Daniel. The soldier knelt and ruffled his companion's fur. "We couldn't have done it without you," he murmured. Shadow barked softly in response, a sound that seemed almost like an acknowledgement, a bond reinforced by shared trials and survival. The children watched the exchange, some smiling, some simply staring in awe at the loyal K9 who had become their guardian angel. Daniel's thoughts drifted to the shadowy figure he had glimpsed earlier. He had assumed it was another survivor, but now, in the clearing light, he wondered if it had been something else, someone opportunistic, seeking to exploit the chaos. He scanned the perimeter cautiously, but the warehouse remained undisturbed, silent except for the soft hum of rain still falling on the roof. Shadow's alert posture reassured him, a silent sentinel ensuring that no one could slip past unnoticed. Hours passed, and the children began to rest, their small forms curling under blankets and makeshift bedding. Daniel remained awake, surveying the damage and planning the next steps. They would need food, water, medical supplies, and shelter. They would need to reconnect with families, neighbors, and the community, piecing together the fragments left by the storm. and they would need to honor the resilience shown in the face of overwhelming odds. The girl approached him again, this time holding a small, soaked notebook. I wrote about everything," she said shyly. "So we don't forget." Daniel took it from her, flipping through pages filled with trembling handwriting, sketches, and fragments of memory. Each page told the story of survival, of fear, courage, and hope. He nodded, impressed by her determination to document their ordeal, to ensure that even amidst destruction, their voices would be heard. Evening approached, and the storm clouds began to break, revealing streaks of golden light across the horizon. The transformation was dramatic, the river still turbulent in places, but now reflecting the warm glow of the setting sun, casting shadows that danced across the debris-strewn streets. Daniel knew that rebuilding would be slow, painful, and challenging, but the first step had been taken: survival. And survival, he understood, was just the beginning. Shadow nudged Daniel's hand, a gentle reminder that the day's heroics had taken a toll. The soldier smiled, leaning down to scratch the dog behind the ears. "We did it, buddy," he said softly. "We made it through the worst. Together." Shadow's tail thumped the floor in response, a silent testament to loyalty, courage, and an unbreakable bond. The girl settled near the door, watching the sky with a mix of wonder and relief. Daniel joined her, drawing a deep breath and feeling the weight of everything they had endured. "You'll remember this day," he said quietly. "Not because it was easy, but because you faced it head-on. You survived." She nodded, eyes glistening, and whispered, "I'll never forget." As night fell, the warehouse became a haven, a sanctuary amid the chaos. The children slept, exhausted but safe, while Daniel and Shadow kept watch. Outside, the world was still fractured, still recovering, but inside, there was warmth, light, and life. And in that moment, Daniel realized something profound: survival was not just about enduring the storm, it was about protecting one another, standing together, and finding hope when it seemed impossible. He glanced at Shadow, who was now lying calmly at the entrance, ears flicking occasionally, ever vigilant. "We'll rebuild," Daniel whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "And we'll make sure everyone remembers that courage matters, that loyalty matters, and that no one faces the storm alone." Shadow's low growl seemed to affirm the sentiment, a bond deeper than words could capture. As the first stars appeared in the clearing sky, Daniel felt a sense of closure. The storm had taken much, but it had also revealed strength, resilience, and a sense of community forged under pressure. The girl, the children, the survivors, they were all part of something larger now, connected by experience, fear, courage, and trust. And at the heart of it all, Shadow remained a constant, unwavering guardian, a reminder that loyalty and courage could shine even in the darkest moments. The night deepened, quiet and calm, and for the first time in hours, Daniel allowed himself to rest, knowing that the hardest part had been survived. The storm had torn through roofs, streets, and homes, but it had not broken the spirit of those who endured. And as he drifted toward sleep, he heard the soft, steady breathing of Shadow beside him, a companion who had faced the storm with him, and who would continue to face whatever came next.